So today we're talking about rational functions. Before we get started, I want to show you some of the different parts that are going to eventually be on the graphs of rational functions. So rational functions almost always are going to have some sort of vertical asymptote and a horizontal asymptote. Remember, asymptotes are like invisible lines that kind of like act as boundaries. So this would be the vertical asymptote. And your graph will not cross these. This right here is an example of a horizontal asymptote. And the different thing about horizontal asymptotes is that rarely they will cross. It's hard to know when, but we'll kind of, in the next few days, talk about how you would maybe identify if it's going to cross. So when we have a rational function, those asymptotes are going to act as like kind of guidelines. And then your graph is usually going to be made up of two or more pieces, which we call branches. So the two pieces that I just drew in are called the branches. Some other things that we have are x-intercepts, y-intercepts. They don't always have x and y intercepts, but they can. And something else that you might see are holes. And what they look like are kind of like just open pieces in the graph. So this is what a hole would look like on the graph. Now you've already talked about excluded values from the domain. The excluded values for the domain either show up as holes or as your vertical asymptotes, right? So now that we know what a rational function looks like, we want to actually find how you would find this information, how you would pick it out if you were given the function rule for a rational function. Now, rational functions are always going to be looking like fractions with some sort of numerator and denominator that are both polynomials. But we should also note that the denominator can't equal 0 because if it did, we'd have 0 on the bottom. So what we're going to do eventually, our whole goal in simplifying these is to factor and cancel to simplify. But before we do that, there's one piece of information that you should pick out before you factor. The first thing we're going to do is find the horizontal asymptote. Now, in order to do this, all you're going to do is compare the degrees of the numerator and the denominator. So you're going to have one of three cases. Either the degree of the numerator is less than the degree of the denominator, and in that case, you automatically have the horizontal asymptote of y equals 0. The second case is that the degree of the numerator is equal to the degree of the denominator. And in this case, your horizontal asymptote will be y equals the leading coefficient of the numerator divided by the leading coefficient of the denominator. And then the very last case is if the degree of the numerator is greater than the degree of the denominator. And in this case, we're going to have no horizontal asymptote. Instead, we'll have a slant asymptote that we'll talk about later.